And now it's time for Celaena to kick some ass.
Hi everyone! Welcome back to the Book Joan Fantasy Podcast. We, Addison and Lorraine, are two best friends who explore the world of fantasy through books, shows, and movies, but with a heavy emphasis on books. This is our second to last episode for Throne of Glass, and we are finally getting to the end. We've solved the murders, and now we just need to see how these final tests play out. As a quick reminder, we will be discussing chapters 40 through 47 specifically, but it is likely that previous chapters will come up as well. If you have not read them and you don't want any spoilers, please pause here, go catch up, and then come back to us when you're ready. Furthermore, we would like to remind everyone that this is an adult podcast where we will have explicit conversations. Explicit language or potentially triggering topics may be discussed, so please be mindful of that and adjust accordingly. Just a few housekeeping updates really quick. Our final episode of Throne of Glass will cover chapters 48 to 55. I can't believe it. I'm so excited. But after Throne of Glass, we have decided to move into Crown of Midnight next. So if you are reading with us, go pick that up so you can have it ready to go. In addition, we are continuing with our House of the Dragon Season 1 recaps. So far, we have released 5 episodes, so if you are a fan of that series or you want an excellent show to watch, then definitely go check those out as well. And of course, our last housekeeping update is the Onyx Storm Countdown. Addison, how many days are we at?
So from today, the day we were recording this, it is May 6th. And there are 260 days until Onyx Storm is released.
Yeah,
didn't feel like that big of a jump, and that's okay.
Anyways, all right, that's all for our updates. And with that, let's get into the show. So per usual, first we'll be starting with chapter summaries to refresh our memories, which we have affectionately renamed as the book reports. Next, we will dive into a deeper analysis with key insights, observations, and questions from events in today's chapters. After the analysis, we will update our champions bracket. So if you're watching on YouTube, you'll get a fun visual of that. And then last but not least, we would like to end the episode on a good note by sharing our favorite quotes or moments. And without further ado, Addison, please take it away with our book report.
Happily, Lorraine. Chapter 40. Celaena is awakened. This time, though, it's not Kale or Elena. It's by our sweet puppy Fleetfoot. After a night of dancing at the Yolma Spa, our girl is exhausted and sleeps until the afternoon. Dorian pays her a visit, and in a slightly awkward post-kiss encounter, Dorian and Celaena flirt and joke, but the conversation takes a more serious turn when Dorian sees Celaena's terrible scars from her time spent in Endovier. Meanwhile, Duke Perrington and Lady Kaltain are walking through the castle greenhouse. Perrington finally tells Kaltain everything, from who Lily Gordana really is to the details of the champions contest. Perrington and Kaltain concoct a plan to poison Celaena to give Cain the edge he needs to defeat her in the final duel. Chapter 41. Celaena is spending a quiet evening in her room reading. As she reads, she comes across the answer to the question we have all been asking for 300 pages. What is killing the champions? The answer is finally revealed to be the Ridderak. Celaena's thoughts begin to spiral as the implications of everything she has learned during her time in Rifthold comes to a head. She doesn't want to believe Nehemia is behind everything, but all signs point to her. Celaena decides to take matters into her own hands and enters the secret tunnels. Celaena makes her way down, down, down into the tunnels. Celaena hears someone chanting in a horrible and dark language and realizes that the person chanting is none other than Cain, which surprises Celaena, but not surprised to us. That was so obvious. Chapter 42. We open this chapter in immediate peril. Cain is in the midst of summoning the Ridderak to him. Cain locks Celaena in the room with the Ridderak, leading her to her death. But Celaena isn't going down without a fight. She quickly concocts an insane plan that is so crazy it just might work. Celaena frantically makes her way to the tomb of Gavin and Elena. Celaena uses Damaris, Gavin's ancient sword, to slay the Ridderak, but she doesn't escape unscathed. The Ridderak managed to bite Celaena's hand. Celaena is able to make it back to her room. Once there, she collapses. Nehemia arrives in the nick of time and heals Celaena's bite from the Ridderak using word marks. Chapter 43. Celaena awakens in her bed and, much to her surprise, finds her hand has been completely healed. Nehemia is waiting for her and Celaena decides it is time to tell Nehemia everything. Celaena confesses her true identity and Nehemia blesses her with the name Alentia, spirit that could not be broken. The next day, Kale and Celaena make their way to the training room. As they walk, Kale asks Celaena if she knows what she is doing with Dorian and warns her to use her brain. Gee, what helpful advice. As they leave the training room, they run into the King of Otterlin. Chapter 44. Celaena is utterly and entirely shaken by the king's presence. Afterwards, Kale is contemplating their interaction with the king and the mysterious circumstances surrounding his return. The king has returned, but every soul in his party has succumbed to a supposed poisoning of their food stores by rebels. Kale can't help but wonder about the potential consequences of Celaena winning the contest and being set loose in Aurelia once again. Kale decides that ultimately he just needs to focus on solving the murders and getting through the final duels. Chapter 45. The next day at training, Celaena decides to warn Nox about what's really going on in the castle. In as few words as possible, she leads Nox to the answers. Nox quickly surmises that Lady Lillian is actually Celaena Sardathian, Otterlin's most famous assassin. Celaena insists that Nox leave the castle as soon as possible for his safety. Later that night, Nox slips out of the castle without a word to anyone. Later on, Kaltain is making her way down the hallway. Plagued with yet another headache, Kaltain notices a figure approaching her, and it seems to have strange wings and whispers and shadows around them. Kane greets Kaltain as he passes by, and she quickly forgets all about the strange encounter by the time she makes it to the Duke's table. Dorian and Celaena play a game of chess in her room. The conversation is laced with stress and anxiety as Celaena continues to think about Kane and the Ridderak. In an attempt to distract herself, she kisses Dorian and lets everything fade away. Dorian finally leaves in the middle of the night, but Celaena is too anxious to sleep and can't help but think about where Kane learned how to use the word marks. Celaena eventually dozes but has a nightmare and wakes in a nervous state. She realizes that she has made it through another night, but that also means tomorrow the duels will take place and her fate will be decided. Chapter 46. Dorian decides to go into the woods to clear his mind, but he can't seem to shake thoughts of Celaena and his feelings for her. Meanwhile, Celaena is also in a contemplative mood. As she stands on her balcony overlooking the city, she can't help but think about her future and what it would mean to serve the king. And also what winning or losing would mean not just for her, but her friends also. Chapter 47. It's duel day. Perrington and Kaltain move forward with their plan to poison Celaena. As Celaena prepares herself for the duel, she takes note of several of the members of the court who have shown up to watch. The king sets forth the rules of the duel. Kane and Renault will duel first, followed by Celaena and Grave. The duel begins and Kane easily defeats Renault. Next, it is Celaena's turn. Before her duel begins, both Cale and Nehemia offer them their personal weapons to use in the duel. In a symbolic gesture of solidarity, Celaena chooses Nehemia's staff. Celaena steps into the ring, and the king says, "Let the second duel commence." I know.
I know. I know. I was sorry,
guys.
An awful place to stop because
I know. I did put a lot of thought and consideration to that for those that are listening, because I felt like once we started the duels, we were just going to want to finish the book. Like it would progress too rapidly. And so it was either stop now or basically do the entire rest of the book. And I felt like that would be too much content to cover to do justice to the work. That's why. So we'll just more to look forward to next week.
I know. Thank you, Addison, for our summaries. And now let's dive in for the analysis.
Sounds good. All right. So we opened the first chapter, chapter 40, with Dorian and Celaena having a conversation. And through that interaction, it's mostly flirtatious and lighthearted. And he does bring up the kiss, and he wants to make sure that she's okay with it, that it wasn't too forward. And Celaena is embarrassed by this, and she gets all kind of goofy, and I don't know, she just acts kind of strangely. And he says it's as if you've never been kissed. And she says, "Of course I've been kissed." She snapped, trying not to think about Sam and what she shared with him. And so I just noted this because we really don't get a lot of information about the backstory with Sam. I don't know for sure. Obviously, I'm just speculating here, but I do think we're going to get Sam's backstory in the Assassin's Blade when we cover that, maybe a little bit in Crown of Midnight. But I just want to note that this is just further confirmation that they did have a romantic entanglement. And so I'm curious to learn more about that. And I'm also sad because we know that Sam is dead. And so that means her first love is gone. So I'm very sad about that already. Heartbreak is on the horizon.
I know, I'm not ready to do that because I feel like when we go back in time to Assassin's Blade, I think there's going to be a lot of tears. Lots of waterworks, I think, for sure.
I will openly cry in this podcast.
Yes, same. Especially if a lover dies. That's like, I love the romantic aspects of books. So if somebody dies, I'm just like, I'm so sad.
It's okay. This is a safe place for everyone. So come as you are.
I know. The other thing that I thought was interesting from their conversation was the portion where Dorian notices the scars on Celaena's back. And again, we've had several discussions about the fact that both Dorian and Chaol have been pretty naive to Celaena's experiences, but as she's opened up and told them more about what's happened to her, they have developed a soft spot for her for sure. And I thought that this was just more confirmation of that, because she takes note that there was something wary in his gaze and something unspeakably sad. And then he says, "Your scars are awful." And then she replies with, "We all bear scars, Dorian. Mine just happen to be more visible than most." And they've been really appalled. They're really taking in the fact that Celaena at such a young age has had such horrible experiences in her life. And that's just not something that they've ever experienced. And I think her response also shows a lot of courage. She doesn't allow the horrible circumstances to keep her traumatized indefinitely. She has made an effort to move on and make the best of life despite her past. So I thought just that whole conversation was really touching.
Yeah, I agree. And we'll talk about this in a later chapter, but when Nehemia gives her the name Spirit That Could Not Be Broken, I feel like this is like kind of a call to that, right? It's such a touching moment also. I'm excited to talk about it, but we'll wait till we get to that chapter. Yeah. So while Dorian and Celaena are having this conversation and this interaction, Kaltain and Perrington are having a very, very different conversation in the greenhouse. A much different tone, much different content. And in this chapter, we see Perrington, again, I know we talked about in the last episode, I still strongly feel that Perrington is manipulating Kaltain. He is using her as a chess piece to maneuver his agenda. And I think it's evident in this chapter that he's doing that. But to give this like a tiny breakdown, basically he tells her everything. He reveals to her who Lady Lillian really is and the king's champion contest and everything. And Kaltain was totally in the dark. She seemed shocked by this news. I don't think she actually knew all along or anything. But there are a couple of interesting, I guess, kind of details in this chapter that we thought were important to note.
First off, after Perrington finally tells Kaltain that Lady Lillian is Celaena Sardathian, then he actually ends up asking her to help him poison her, okay?
Yep.
Who's the assassin now? Perrington is, okay? So he says, in the duel, she'll drink a toast in honor of the goddess and gods. I was going to ask you to preside over the toast as a representation of the goddess. Perhaps you could slip something into her drink.
I also just want to clarify that when Perrington asked Kaltain to poison Celaena, his justification is that he just wants to weaken her so that will give Cain the edge in the duel. It's not to kill her, because even Kaltain is kind of like, oh, to kill her? That seems a little extreme. So I did want to clarify that the intent is not to kill. However, I don't believe that's how it's going to play out, but I just wanted to note it.
So as part of this conversation between Kaltain and Perrington, after Perrington finally tells Lady Kaltain who Lady Lillian actually is and reveals that she is the infamous Celaena Sardathian, Otterland's assassin, then he goes on to recruit her into a plan that seems pretty assassin-y in my opinion. I mean, he's not going to kill her, but who's the assassin now, if you're asking me?
I mean,
anyways,
they're conspiring for her demise, right?
Exactly.
So potato.
It's in the same realm. Yeah, same realm of things, okay? And he says to Kaltain, in the duel, she'll drink a toast in honor of the goddess and gods. I was going to ask you to preside over the toast as a representation of the goddess. Perhaps you could slip something into her drink. Lady Kaltain is a little shocked by that. She says, kill her myself? She's kind of like, what? I mean, I don't like Celaena, but I wasn't going to go that far, right? So she's a little shocked by it. But then the Duke says, no, but the king has agreed that drastic measures should be taken in a way that will make Dorian believe things were an accident. If we were merely to give her a dose of bloodbane, not lethal, but just enough to cause her to lose control, it would give Cain the advantage he needs. So this is a point of contention for us. I took that literally to mean, oh shit. Okay, the king is in on it. What the fuck? And that he's been planning to have her killed this entire time, right? Or you're thinking that perhaps Perrington is just making it up.
Yes. Yeah. So I have two reasons to clarify my position. I do not believe that the king said that to Duke Perrington at all. I think that Perrington is using that to manipulate Kaltain into, I guess, feeling a little better about her decision, or just sort of pressuring her more. And I have two reasons. The first is the king isn't back from wherever he was yet. Okay, so unclear how he would have contacted Perrington for them to discuss this, right? It's possible, and we're just not privy to how their communication has continued while he's been gone. But it is my impression that the king went somewhere, nobody knows where, how to contact him, and that's it. We see that he comes back later, but that isn't after this conversation has occurred in the book. The second reason that I do not think that the king actually said this or is conspiring in any way is, to me, it doesn't make any sense, because the king wants an assassin, right? And Celaena's the best. He has to know that. And if he wanted her killed or didn't want her there, he would have never allowed her in the contest. He would have told Dorian no, or he would have had her killed immediately. And so why let her go through all the trouble of the contest and now potentially win the duels for him to just off her? So it doesn't make any sense to me that the king would want to conspire to get rid of her.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense, because we don't know where the king's been. As far as we know, he hasn't been communicating with anybody. But there are some other things, little snippets of information that, when I combine them together, I think this could indicate the king's in on it. And we'll get there when we get to those points. But I don't know. Obviously we have a bad feeling about the king. Something is sus with him. We just don't know exactly what it is. But
I have a theory about that, actually.
Okay, moving on. Kaltain actually then ends up agreeing and says, "Tell me what I need to do." Now, I won't say that I'm totally shocked, because obviously she doesn't like Celaena. Celaena is a threat to her because it gets in her path of trying to get to Dorian. But I do think that part of the reason why she flat out agreed to conspiring to help get Celaena killed is because she's under the influence of Perrington via his ring, and this swayed her to say yes. I think that the magic Perrington uses persuades her by using her own desires against her.
Oh, that's interesting. He can sense what her weaknesses are, and then make decisions and manipulate her based on those weaknesses.
Right.
That's interesting.
Yes, because obviously we see the black ring on his finger pulsed and her head gave a throb of pain in response. And then Kaltain notices Perrington's face shifted for a moment towards something pained and ugly, but it was so fast she barely noticed it above the pounding rising in her head. And then lastly, his ring was ice cold against her skin, and she fought the urge to rip her hands from his grip. And then he says, "Don't you want to help Dorian? Once he's free of her, ... And then she has these thoughts come up in her head where they say, "Then he'll be mine. He'll be mine as he should be." And so that combination of things, I'm like, Perrington obviously knows that she's not 100% into it. He just knows. And I think he is definitely using her own desires against her.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about the way that Perrington uses magic or whatever, how it's manifested. So that's interesting. I think regardless, it's further confirmation that being in Perrington's presence and his use of his dark, evil black ring gives Kaltain headaches, and how Kaltain seems has a heightened sensitivity to that. So, because that's what I wrote. I'm like, oh, more headaches. So
every time that ring's around.
I know. I kind of feel bad for her. I was like, it must be awful to have a headache like that all the time.
I know. But yeah, my last question is just simply, if they just plan on killing her, why did they have her get to this point? If the end goal is just to get rid of her, what's the purpose?
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know.
Why not kill her earlier?
Yeah.
If they wanted her dead. Because King basically tried to, as we see later.
Yeah. I don't know. It's a good question. Maybe suspicion? I really don't know. I'll have to think about it.
Okay.
Don't ask such hard questions. So this next chapter is really big and exciting. We get a lot of information and a lot of questions answered. So Celaena's in her room reading, and she comes across a page in a book where she sees a creature, a foul, horrible creature. And there is an ancient sort of footnote written by someone long ago that explains what the creature is. And it is a Ridderak. And it explains that it is from a different world and that in exchange for the flesh of someone, it will transfer the strength of that person to the person who summons it. So pretty obvious that whoever, aka Cain, is doing this is letting the Ridderak kill them, and then they're taking the strength of all the champions that have been murdered. And that's probably a pretty big motivation for why they're doing that. Celaena, when she comes across this, obviously she's immediately alarmed. And we get a lot in all of these chapters, but this one specifically, of her internal thoughts and how she's processing this information. And she poses a question about magic and word gates in relation to the Ridderak that I thought was really interesting. The first quote I have is, "And she wondered darkly how could their power possibly still work when magic itself was gone?" So my first response to that is just obvious. Maybe magic still exists in some form or fashion. It's a select few. There's a way to hold power. Unfortunately, we don't know enough about how magic worked in the realm pre the King of Ireland. So it's really hard to say how it's accessed and utilized. There's not enough information for us to really dive deep into that yet, unfortunately. The second thought that Celaena has is that it was impossible because magic was gone, but the text said word marks existed outside of magic. What if their power still worked? I just want to highlight, if you're reading the physical copy of the book, the word outside is italicized. And I always look out for that because usually it's meant to imply heavy emphasis. And so I thought this quote was also interesting because it indicates that word marks and magic are separate, which was a little bit confusing to me, right? Because my understanding is the things that word marks can perform are magical. So then it sort of creates this landslide of questions, right? Can any old person, magic or not, use word marks and access their power? Or do you have to have some kind of, magical lineage to use them? I would imagine, based on what we know about the universe so far, it's very difficult to learn about word marks. Basically, all information about them has been destroyed. So it pretty much would have to be learned pre-King of Ireland's destruction of information and knowledge, or it has to be information that's literally passed down by word of mouth, which we know would also be very difficult because the king pretty much murdered anyone who knew anything about magic, and or anyone who is still living who knows those things. Likely it would be really, really risky for them to share that information or even discuss it pretty much anywhere in Aurelia. So it opens the door to a lot of questions about word marks, and I'm really interested because I was just under the deep impression that word marks and magic were inherently linked. So it's a little confusing now that potentially they're not. So I'm interested definitely to know more about that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think my impression from this is we also know in previous chapters, they talked about word marks in association with the ancient religion. I think it was Nehemia who had said that. So I feel like word marks, word gates, and whatever system of magic they operate within supersedes the current magic or general magic.
It predates.
Perhaps. Yes.
Okay.
Like I think it is more of an ancient, probably more powerful, because obviously it's connected to word gates, which open portals to completely different dimensions.
Fair enough.
And so I think it is just like the most powerful version of it, perhaps. And because it is so powerful, or because not very many people know about it, that's why it is still able to be used. But you have to know about it, obviously, because not very many people, like we talked about, know what they are in the first place. But that's the only reason I could think of how, if magic is outlawed, that's how they still exist, is because they predate and supersede in power. I guess within the structures of however magic works, they are a stronger form of it. And so getting rid of general magic wouldn't necessarily get rid of these, perhaps.
Yeah, there's also a lot of questions in Celaena's mind as we continue throughout the set of chapters. How much does the king know about word marks? Is he accessing this magic? Of course, how does Cain know? Who knows what about word marks, right? We really don't know who knows about them other than we know for sure confirmed via text. that Cain knows about them and Nehemia knows about them. And that's about it. So I'm definitely interested to learn more about that.
Yeah. As part of Celaena's thoughts that she's having, this part was a little annoying because she still thinks that Nehemia could potentially be involved, which I kind of understand, but I'm also like, okay, I really don't think that's the case anymore.
Yeah. The logic is sound, but I still just couldn't get behind it. It just, I don't know. What we know about Nehemia's character is just that doesn't seem like her MO, you know? I don't know.
Right.
It's hard for me to really invest in that storyline.
Right. Which I'm assuming it was meant to be another red herring situation just for us to consider it and then be surprised later. But Celaena considers that perhaps Nehemia wants to instigate a full-on rebellion. And so I have a little prediction or a question. Do you think that this is exactly what is going to happen in the next books? Will Celaena and Nehemia both kind of lead some kind of rebellion against Adarlan and reinstate magic and the countries to their original states? This is a beyond this into the universe prediction.
By the next book, no. That feels like a book 4, 5, 6, maybe somewhere in there. I will say, just based on what we know about fantasy and how this universe is structured, it seems inevitable that at least a part of the main conflict is going to be control of Aurelia and control of Adarlan and their conquest, right? And that's foreshadowed a lot when conversations and reflections about Dorian's character and how he wants to be a different ruler and he would not be going into all these other countries and going on conquest. So I feel that is inevitable in some form or fashion. However, I don't think the conflict is going to be as straightforward as that. I don't think it's just going to be there's a rebellion, they're trying to overthrow the evil king. I think there's going to be a lot more at play. I think there's a much deeper rooted evil that is probably going to be the overarching conflict. I think that the king of Adarlan is going to be like a mid-level boss. You know what I mean? Like he's not the end boss. You know, he's like halfway through the game. So it's really hard just based on what we know about this world to put a place on where that storyline will pick up and take place. But I think it's definitely fair to say that that's going to come up.
Okay. So then to follow up, are you admitting that you believe the king of Adarlan is involved with this evil?
When you say this evil, what do you mean? Do you mean the Ridderak?
I mean, the Ridderak is one part of it, but whatever network of evil is going on, that Cain, the Ridderak, whatever other thing that Elena is referring to, that she needs Celaena to help conquer and destroy.
Oh, well, obviously. I think it's pretty obvious that, I mean, he disappears under mysterious circumstances. He returns in even more mysterious circumstances. And I actually have a theory about the king and what his motivations are, sort of, which we'll discuss in a different chapter. You look so gleeful. I don't understand why. Did I walk into a trap? I'm confused.
Well, because now I'm just like, okay, so then how do you not think that he knows what Perrington is planning?
Because I think those are separate. I don't think those are separate things, right? Evil has a purpose and a motivation. Real evil is not just going around just killing everybody, right? And so it doesn't make sense to me that the king wouldn't want to have her killed. I think that Celaena is useful to the king to further his evil agenda, and she's worth more alive to him than dead. You little goofball. You're not gonna trap me, okay? You're not gonna trap me. I did 10 years of competitive debate. You got nothing on me, Lorraine. Nothing.
It's unfathomable to me that they are not connected to each other and that the king wouldn't freaking know.
Do you want to make a bet?
Anyways, what's the prize? What are we betting?
Loser has to Venmo the winner money for dinner. Dinner on the loser.
Okay.
I'll do it.
Okay.
I'll get it.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah. Okay, so just to clarify the terms of the bet, I do not feel that the King of Adarlan is involved with specifically the plot for Duke Perrington and Kaltain to poison Celaena, thus having her weakened and killed by Cain in a duel. I do not believe that. And your point is that you feel that the king is involved, that Perrington's statement about the king wants it to look like an accident is accurate.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So we're betting on a fictional evil king. Okay, yes, I love this.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay,
first bet of our podcast so far. We have not done this, but we're doing it now. So place your bets,
like a
everybody.
really odd thing to go all in on, but that's fine. I bet heavy on the favorite.
All right. Anyways, okay, we'll move on from this point.
Back to it.
As
Celaena has all of these thoughts about Nehemia and the Ridderak and everything that has transpired, she decides that she's not going to be a sitting duck, that she's going to go to the tunnel and she's going to confront whoever she thinks it's Nehemia. Obviously it's not, but she's going to go and confront this evil. And she comes across and she hears someone chanting. And to quote the book directly, because they do a good job of describing the sound of the chanting, it didn't speak any tongue that she recognized. It was guttural and harsh and grated against her ears as if it sucked the very warmth from her bones. And I thought this was notable, one, because it's such like a vivid description of a voice, right? You kind of cringe a little bit when you hear it. It has to sound really harsh and guttural and just, I don't know, icky. So I thought this was interesting because our impression based off the snippets of backstory we've got for Celaena is that she's pretty well traveled, right? We can assume that her work took her to many different places. And so she probably knows and or recognizes quite a few languages. And for it to be completely foreign to her, I think was a little bit notable. And my immediate thought is this has to be the language of evil, right? In a lot of common fantasy tropes, there's a dark, evil magic, ancient language of evil that is long forgotten and then often resurrected. And so I also really want to know, how did Cain learn it? Obviously, of course, how did he learn to use the word gates and get the ring and bring about the Ridderak and all that? But I would assume it's an ancient language that's been long dead. How did he learn it? So I don't know. I just thought that whole scene poses a lot of questions of like, how did Cain, kind of a nobody criminal, get access to that kind of power and that kind of magic?
Well, the only thing that I can think of that comes to mind is, remember we were speculating about in the last few chapters, obviously Dorian knew about the Dark Lord Erewhon and how the amulet was the thing that allowed the Queen Celaena to see him and identify what he really was, and then that shocked the Dark Lord and Gavin slew him, etc., etc. But I think at some point we were thinking that maybe the Dark Lord didn't actually die, and that he's still trailing around in some form or fashion. And if Cain is just a character that the Dark Lord or evil, so to speak, is inhabiting currently, but it's like transferring what it knows to Cain, and that's why Cain knows the language to some extent. That's kind of like the only other thing, unless, you know, somehow somebody gave him an ancient lost text and was like, here, figure it out. But I doubt I don't think it was
light bedtime reading.
Yeah, I don't think it was like that. I mean, he must be very, very closely involved with this evil, you know, to know this language and everything.
Yeah, I don't know.
The only funny thing about this entire situation to me was, I don't know why I picked up on this, but Celaena just goes down to the tunnels. She's like, I'm going to figure this out. And what does she have with her? A candlestick and a makeshift knife. And I'm like, what do you...
And it's made out of hairpins. Not even a butter knife. It's literally made out of hairpins.
I was just like, you just decided you're gonna go check out this evil in the tunnels, and all you have is a candlestick and a makeshift hairpin knife. And I was like, girl, I don't know.
Do better, Celaena. Do better.
She's bold, that's for sure.
That's for damn sure.
Also, this was shocking because this whole time I thought Cain was the secondary character, but this scene confirmed that Cain is the main player. He's the one who's doing the summoning. So that was really shocking to me, because I was like, oh, Perrington must be the one that's controlling everybody and Cain's a secondary figure. Throwback to when I thought Cain was going to transform and turn into himself.
I forgot about that. Oh yeah, I'm feeling much better about my bet. You literally thought Cain would transform into a beast. I think I'm going to be just...
I was wrong. Okay, I'll admit I was wrong. Okay,
music to my ears.
He is the summoner. Alrighty. Chapter 42. So after the big reveal, we see Cain kneeling on the floor in front of this black void, and out creeps the Ridderak. And I just wanted to point out the description of it because I thought it was creepy as hell. So the description says, it was something out of an ancient god's nightmare. Its hairless gray skin was stretched tightly across its misshapen head, displaying a gaping mouth filled with black fangs. And honestly, it sounds so gross, so terrifying. And the picture that comes to mind is a cross between the evil Spider-Man and a Demogorgon from Stranger Things.
Oh,
like that.
Yeah.
That's
the
like
body with the knees that are bent the wrong way.
Yes, yeah, that was the picture of it that I got. Yeah,
well, that
I was like
a good bad way.
Yeah. But I was like, ooh, I am glad this does not exist in real life. So
yeah. So the other thing that I thought was interesting about the description of the scene where Cain is summoning the Ridderak is there's a quote that says, he dragged a hand across the floor before the darkness and greenish light sprung up from where his fingers passed. And I note this because if you'll call way back to, I think, the first and second episode, we've talked about how we think that the green light in this book, in this universe, represents magic and more likely represents an evil sort of magic. And the two examples that we gave previously from the book, and I actually did a little research on my ebook. I searched green, greenish, anything having to do with green. So the first example is when Celaena is on her way to Rifthold and she sees the glass castle from far away, and she says it seems to pulse with a green light. And the impression it gives the reader is that it's a bit of an ominous looking place. And then the second time that it comes up is when she goes to meet the King of Outerland with all the other champions at the beginning of the contest, and he lays the framework and the rules for how the contest is going to go. There's a giant fang-shaped fireplace that's very ominous looking and very foreboding. And she says that the fire had a greenish tint to it. And so those are both the call-outs that we made in previous episodes. And so I just thought this is, pretty concrete confirmation that a greenish light has to do with magic and, with specifically with evil magic.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. I noticed the same things. So
you're so smart, Lorraine.
Just on the same page.
So the second part of that, this seems so obvious, but I just feel I have to say it because I'm going to continue talking about word gates forever because I think they're super important to this universe, but also the Massverse. Celaena says, and I quote, "The creature was not of this world. The word marks worked. The gates were real." So if we didn't have obvious physical confirmation with the Ridderak and Cain summoning it, Celaena herself is acknowledging that, yes, that there are word gates that can access other realms. And in those realms are infinite possibilities of things, good or bad. Seems right now mostly bad, but hopefully there will be a word gate that will take us somewhere good in the near future. We'll see.
I hope so. We'll see.
Yeah.
So after the Ridderak comes out, obviously Cain shuts her into whatever room they're in, and she's like, "Oh shit, gotta make a plan."
Understatement. She's like, "Oh no."
But in her thought process, she's watching the Ridderak get ready to attack her, and she has to think about what she's gonna do. And all of a sudden, Elena's advice comes to mind. Previously, Elena told her, look to your right. She brought her down into the tunnels and everything to show her something in particular. And Celaena's like, oh, I think this might be kind of crazy, but I don't have any other choice. I'm gonna go for it. And going for it means making her way over to that tunnel where Queen Celaena and Gavin's tomb lays, which happens to be on the right. And so she does just that. She jumps over the Ridderak and she takes off running. She gets to the tomb, and in that room is Gavin's sword. And we know Damaris has been used to slay evil before, and it's going to do it again. So she takes Damaris, and right in the nick of time, she swings around and slices into the Ridderak's, like, I think through the mouth, basically.
I thought it was more she shoved it up through the roof of its mouth, right?
Okay.
Brain. This is really graphic. I didn't mean for it to be this way, but and that's how he was able to bite her hand, is when she made the upward thrust to slay it.
Okay. Either way, it was in the mouth some way, somehow.
She killed it. That's the important thing that happened. She killed it. She killed it dead.
Exactly. She did. Except then, of course, she also gets injured in the process. because
that's not good.
As Addison just said, at least part of it does puncture around her hands. And that is a really bad, nasty wound because immediately she has this ice cold burning sensation. She's kind of going into delirium, but she does make it back to her room and immediately collapses. And she has this description of feeling really icy, which I thought was interesting because every other reference to people, I guess more specifically with Perrington, like Lady Kaltain took note of the fact that Perrington was icy whenever he gripped her and did. Yeah, that definitely has to be connected. That whatever evil power, one of the ways that it harms or how it feels is in this icy,
a cold
manner.
Sensation. Yeah.
Devoid of warmth, I guess.
Yeah, that's a perfect way to describe it.
Anyways, she makes it back to her room. She's collapsed. And as she's sitting there, thinking she's going to die, Nehemia miraculously arrives and she picks her up to the bathing chamber, gets her all cleaned up. And Celaena takes note of the fact that Nehemia starts saying something in a language that she doesn't recognize. Her quote was, "The princess held her firm, saying words in a tongue that the assassin didn't understand. The light in the room pulsed and her skin tingled. Celaena found her arms covered in glowing turquoise marks." Word marks. So, my first question about that is this the same language that Cain was using to activate the word marks to open the word gate?
I don't think
is it a
so.
similar... Well, I was thinking about this because I think we came to a conclusion back in previous episodes where we figured that the word marks are morally neutral.
Right.
And so I'm wondering if you can use the same language to access them, but depending on the combination of things that you're saying or whatnot, obviously that corresponds to whether or not it's evil or good.
I just wonder because there was such a vivid description of how it sounded when Cain was summoning the Ridderak. Remember, it was guttural and harsh and sounded not of this world. And I feel like Celaena would have had the same visceral reaction had Nehemia's words sounded that way. I do wonder if the way the words are spoken, like the words may be the same, but the way they're spoken is based on the intent. So if it's to heal, it has a healing connotation. If it's to harm, it has a evil, dark connotation. I don't know, because I mean, logic would seem to dictate that the word marks would have one universal language. If we're presuming they're morally neutral, which I think it's fair to say that they are, given one was used to summon a Ridderak and one was used to heal Celaena and save her life. So,
right.
I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah, I was curious about that. But the other thing that I thought was interesting was that they were turquoise. And if we remember, Nehemia's mask that she wore at the ball was turquoise and gold, I think. I don't know. It was definitely turquoise was one of the colors. I don't know what it means, but it was something similar. Yeah, just a connection.
Yeah.
Now, I did have a couple follow-up questions just about the word gates in general and then Cain's relationship to the Ridderak. Obviously, Cain opened a word gate using word marks and a spell of some sort, but I was wondering, does that portal remain open until it's closed? And if it does stay open, are we going to see more of the Ridderaks coming out? Or do you think it was just a one portal, one Ridderak situation?
That's a good question. My gut reaction is that a very, very common trope in pretty much all of fantasy is that magic always exacts a price. There's always a price you have to pay, right? And I would imagine that there's a price that Cain has to pay each time that he summons the Ridderak. If you recall, there's a description about how his hand is bloodied, and maybe it's the blood. He has to slice his hand and do some drops of blood. But I would imagine that it's usually some kind of physical sacrifice, some of your strength, blood, etc. And so I would think that it's a very temporary portal. I think to hold a portal open for any length of time would require someone very powerful and a much deeper understanding of magic. I don't think that the portal is probably open for very long. I think if Celaena were to go back down there, I think it would just appear as a closed room.
Yeah. And I feel like also now that the Ridderak has been killed, it probably also would close. Because I'm assuming like, the Ridderak, I think, goes back into the portal after it's done with its business.
Right? I don't think the Ridderak is actively living in the castle or anything. I think it's pretty clear it's called, used, and then sent back to where it came from until the next time it's called again. So I think that's fair.
Okay.
You would be able to hide it in the castle.
That's true. Well, I mean, not that anyone goes in the tunnels except for Celaena, but still, I think you would probably know about it. Also, I want to clarify how this relationship works between Kate and the Ridderak. So the Ridderak is the thing that actually consumes the victims, and then it will transfer the power it gets from the victim to the summoner. Do you think those word marks are used to not only summon the Ridderak, but also to command it?
Yeah, I did wonder about that because we don't really get a good sense of how sentient the Ridderak is. To me, it reads like it's just a mindless killing machine. Anybody who would have stumbled in there, it probably would have attacked. But obviously, it begs the question then, why wouldn't it just turn around and attack Cain? So I think you're right that the summoner, based on how the word marks are utilized, probably maintains some control and power over it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a very useful tool because it would just kill anyone who summoned it. So I would say probably yes, based on what we know so far. I'm not confident that we'll ever see a Ridderak again. I think it may have just been the current evil for the purposes of the plot in this story. I definitely think we're going to see evil access through word gates again, but I'm not sure we'll actually come across another Ridderak.
Okay. Sorry, I had a lot more questions than I thought about this. My next question is, the Ridderak submits to Cain, and I can't help but think that this must be a clue as to how powerfully evil Cain is, because I would imagine it doesn't just show reverence to anyone, or maybe it's just based off of purely whoever commands it.
Yeah, I think it's more like who holds the leash is who it responds to, who's summoning it.
So it doesn't really matter. Okay.
Yeah, I think anyone evil with the right word marks could have summoned it.
Okay. And then my final question is, how did Nehemia sense or know to come to Celaena's room?
Yes, I had the same question. And it is even in subtext addressed because Celaena starts to ask, but how did you? And Nehemia says it's of no consequence. It's not important right now. And that was what I wanted to know, is how the hell did Nehemia know? I don't think that she was involved with the Ridderak anyway, and that's what drew her to that space. But I did wonder what made Nehemia, she just happened to come to her room at that time. No. She had to know something was up.
Right. Well, that's why I was thinking. We know Nehemia knows about the word marks and is able to heal Celaena with them, and she was just really sketch about what she knew about them at the beginning of the book. But I kind of feel like maybe Nehemia is aware that there's some kind of evil, and maybe that's part of the reason why she's been learning about word marks. I was kind of thinking maybe she's had experiences with this outside of the current situation.
Possible. I mean, because she knows about the murders. Everyone knows about the murders, right? Well, maybe not everyone, but a significant portion of the population of the castles knows. And then remember when she was asking Celaena in the courtyard for details about the body and she really presses her for information? Yes. I would assume if she does not have direct experience with the Ridderak, she's familiar with the demon. And so that's why she seemed so troubled and also wanted to know the specific details of the murders, because that probably gave her a hint that it had something to do with a Ridderak specifically, or just something evil that really could only be summoned through a word gate.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I feel like maybe there's some kind of general connection with use of word marks in this particular type of magic, because if Nehemia knows them, maybe she's able to kind of sense when it's being used. And so that's how she knew that Cain, or well, she didn't know who it was, maybe, but she could just sense that something with word marks was active, and maybe she followed the it was like a little source, and she followed to the source because she could feel it. I don't know.
I wondered about that too. If you know how to use word marks, if you have a heightened sensitivity to when they're being used in the vicinity, so I did wonder about that too. But ultimately, I just think we don't know. We just really don't know enough about Nehemia. I really hope in the next book we get a lot more Nehemia, which I think we will, because, I mean, again, I don't know. I truly have not read past the chapters we're discussing today, but we can assume Celaena becomes the assassin and then lives in the castle for at least a set period of time, and presumably Nehemia will continue to be there. So I really hope to see a lot more of Nehemia and a lot more of her backstory.
Yeah, same. So many questions, not enough answers.
I know. So for chapter 43, it's a relatively short chapter, and we don't have a ton of notes about it. It's more just a plot-driven chapter in which you get to enjoy Nehemia and Celaena repairing the rift in their friendship. Celaena awakens in her bed and finds Nehemia there, and they basically have a heart-to-heart where they confess not totally everything, but pretty much everything. And Celaena tells her what her true identity is and about her time in Endovir. And Nehemia, I think this is very touching for Nehemia because I think she was worried that Celaena was going to die, obviously. I mean, she was pretty close to dying, and Nehemia calls that out. She says, you would have been dead in minutes if I wouldn't have been here. So I think she's a little emotional because of that. I think she's emotional because Celaena is sort of in a heightened emotional state, and I think maybe both of them were feeling some tension because there was a strain on the relationship because Nehemia said something about, you looked at me with mistrust in your eyes and that hurt. So I think both of them were kind of like, I was mad at you because you were mad at me. And I was mad at you because you were mad at me, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so they have a resolution to this, and they're able to be open and honest with each other about pretty much everything. And in that conversation, Nehemia gives her the name Alentia. And she says, I give you this name to use with honor, to use when other names grow too heavy. I name you Alentia, spirit that could not be broken. And there's nothing distinctly magical about the event that transpires, but you get the sense that there's something a little bit more symbolic to it than just her speaking the words. Celaena describes feeling the name sort of fall upon her and take root in her. And so I had some questions about this. What does it mean, right? In general, what does it mean? And does it have magical connotations? Is this something that Celaena is going to be able to access and call upon later? I can't really think of how it could be magical, but just when you start talking about names, I get excited. As we've discussed in a previous episode, I get very excited when we start talking about names. But I also wondered, too, if maybe it's specific to Eelway. And if she ever finds herself in need of help, she can use the name among people from Eelway, and they'll know that they can trust her. Like, it may have more cultural significance there. Or if she ever finds herself in a situation with a bunch of rebels or strangers and they're unsure of whether they can trust her, she can speak the name, or that they can sense that this is a gift that Nehemia has bestowed. Because even Nehemia says, I would like to give to you what I have given to few before. And so implying that Nehemia is giving some kind of special gift. So I would obviously just wish that everything was explained to me and I knew immediately, but of course that's not how reading works. But I would love to know, I guess, more what it means.
I think that point about it'll have significance, at least in Eelway, I think that's a really interesting point. It will probably be useful to her later and will be like a code for,
you can trust me.
Yeah, you can trust me.
Friend of Nehemia. Yeah.
Yes. But I really like that conversation with them because I'm just really happy that they're friends again.
Me too.
And that they were able to confide in each other. I can't imagine how difficult it would be to conceal your identity from someone, especially if you consider them to be a good friend.
Mm-hmm. Couple that with the fact that Celaena is so isolated in the castle. Their really only friends are Kaltain and Dorian. And obviously we know those relationships are a little confusing. And so Nehemia is the only friend and ally she has in the castle that doesn't want anything from her, or there's no confusion about what's going on, right? So
right.
I agree. I'm glad that their friendship is in repair and that they're able to be more honest moving forward.
Yes. But of course, the one question that remains is, why didn't she tell Nehemia about Cain and the Ridderak?
Yes, that stood out to me too. Why? And why didn't Nehemia ask? Because Celaena, I think, even says she didn't tell Nehemia of Cain and she didn't ask. It's like, you saw the body. Nehemia has to know that some kind of creature attacked her. So I did think that was a little odd too.
I wonder if they're both doing the protective thing, because it's the same reason why Celaena doesn't talk to Dorian or Chaol about what's going in there either. I mean, part of it with Chaol was the fact that she'll have to admit that there's these secret tunnels, and obviously that's not great for her future plans. But there is this, I think, a degree of trying to protect them, maybe to some extent, or
it's possible.
Just worry that because she still doesn't understand what it is, she's not sure who she can fully confide in with that information. Yeah, I think she wants to be sure about what it is, what they're used for, what the potential of use for the word marks and everything is going to be before she decides who she can talk to about it with.
That's fair. I agree. This next chapter is relatively short. The whole chapter takes place in a hallway with Chaol and Celaena. And as they're walking to the training room, they see that the King of Otterland has returned from his mysterious travels. And Celaena has the same visceral reaction to seeing the king as she did the first time. She's filled with dread and anxiety, and it leaves her feeling really, really discombobulated, out of sorts. It's a very visceral reaction that we see her have. And so obviously we know that the king is up to something. He has mysterious travels, and when he comes back, his entire party is gone, dead under mysterious circumstances. And in general, we know all of his conquests have been marred with evil deeds. But when Celaena sees him, she describes him in a really interesting way that I wanted to call out. She says, "There was darkness in his eyes that felt cold and foreign, like the gaps between the stars. Could one man destroy a world? Was his ambition so consuming? She could hear the din of war." So for my second batshit crazy theory of the podcast, my first one was about the Mass verse. This one is not as well founded, so I'm just going to introduce it here, and then I'm going to continue to support it. In the previous episode specifically, we called out the idea that perhaps the Dark Lord still exists in some form or fashion, right? I don't think he's just walking Aurelia doing evil deeds, but his essence, sort of like a Sauron, Voldemort kind of vibe, okay? So my question is, what if the king is actually possessed and therefore being controlled by an evil spirit, specifically Erewhon? Sort of like a Professor Quirrell situation in Harry Potter. This is really the only major evil that we've been introduced to in the story, but they have mentioned him a couple of times. And I don't think we can ignore the significance of the fact that Elena and Gavin's tomb is introduced, the sword de Mars that we use to slay him, the Eye of Elena, the amulet that's given to Celaena, was also integral in getting rid of Erewhon. And so I really do wonder, because the king, it's not just that what he does is evil, but it seems that his very presence reeks of something evil and darker. It seems like a basic human, even a really evil one, wouldn't have that kind of effect on someone. And we've talked about how Celaena also might have a heightened sensitivity to magic, giving her mysterious past. And I wonder if that's why she has such a visceral reaction to the king, because what she's actually sensing is an evil presence that has taken over the king. I don't know. It's my batshit crazy theory. Obviously not a lot of evidence to support there, a lot of just circumstantial speculation, but for now, I'm going to stick to it.
Oh, I 100% agree that there's like something.
Yay.
Oh, yeah, there's no way. From the very beginning, I was like, something is off with this kid. He's creepy. He gives off a weird vibe. He's always out here doing random stuff that nobody knows about. It's just very suspicious. And she says, as she's watching the king, something dangerous lurked about him. It was an air of death that she'd felt standing before that black void summoned by Cain. It was the stench of another world. And on top of that, in the very beginning of the chapter, it says, Celaena's heart gave a screech and dove behind her spine. Each of the little scars on her hand throbbed.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yes.
And I'm assuming it still throbs because whatever evil the Ridderak contains kind of poisoned her in a way. And it's so connected. Yeah, and they're all connected. And that's why you have all of these similar descriptions surrounding the king, surrounding Perrington, Cain, the Ridderak. It's just all... They're all connected. They're all involved.
We need to get you a cigarette and some red tape and some pictures for the wall.
And again, this is why I think the king knows about what Perrington is planning. How can they be connected like this and not know about what the other one's doing? I just find it hard to believe. We'll see. I'm
going to stay up and read tonight just so I can... to prove you wrong. Expect a midnight text from me.
So the second notable thing from chapter 44 is when Chaol is pacing around. He's by himself at this point, and he remembers and thinks about just Celaena's general improvement, but then his thoughts also drift to how pretty odd the king's return has been and the circumstances surrounding his return as well. While he's thinking about Celaena and the king, he is still feeling a little conflicted since he knows the king dislikes Celaena and that he would be helping with her release, knowing she was the world's greatest assassin. Anyways, moving on to Chaol's thoughts about the king specifically. His thoughts are, why had the king arrived alone? And more importantly, how had everyone in his traveling party died? And then he also goes on to think there was something brewing, a cauldron that the king had journeyed to stir. Celaena somehow knew it, because he obviously very visible reaction. She just gets a very bad feeling, and it shows whenever she's around the king. And he takes note of that. And I have a lot of questions too. I want to know, what has the king been doing? Nobody knows. Why did everybody that was with him die? And the king's like, oh, I don't know. He's very casual about it.
Yes, that's the thing. You'd think he would come in and be in a rage and be like, oh, the rebels, they killed my party. And he's just like, oh, they poisoned our food. And
yeah. It seems, honestly, truly, it just sounds totally unbelievable, because you're like, what? You
bullshit.
You guys just slaughtered 500 of them mercilessly, and you're gonna tell me that they got you with some poison in their food? Like, no, I don't think so.
No, it's a no for me. So this next chapter takes place over several different scenes or snippets of different things happening in the castle. But the first thing is that Nox and the other champions and Celaena, they're all training before the final test and duel. And as they're preparing to start training, Celaena is observing Cain, and she notices that ring on Cain's finger and wonder if it has a connection to his horrible abilities. And I want to call this out because Lori and I have discussed this many times in this podcast, that the rings are indicative of something. Perrington has one as well. And Lori astutely pointed out that it's made of the same, well, we don't know for sure, but it appears to be the same dark black rock material that the clock tower is made of. And so our impression is that it's all related in some way, shape, or form. So I did just want to note here that even Celaena has made the connection that the ring potentially has connection to Cain's abilities. But the more important part of this chapter is the conversation that Nox and Celaena have. And it's a very subtle conversation. There's a lot of subtext there. And Celaena basically leads Nox to the conclusion that she is not really Lilian Gordana. She's actually Celaena Sardothian. And she doesn't go into great detail with Nox, but she tells him that there's a horrible creature, that she's come across it, and then he needs to leave. And we know from a previous chapter that there's no consequence to Nox not winning the champions contest. His sponsor already told him that if he loses, he'll be set free, and basically he's just free to go on and live his life. His record, so to speak, has been washed clean. And so from Celaena's perspective, Nox really has it made perfectly. He doesn't have to actually be the king's assassin, and he also gets a clean slate. And Nox ultimately decides to leave, which good for him. And also sad for us. I really enjoyed Nox. I know we don't get a lot of him in this book, but I said it in a previous episode and I'll say it again here. I have a feeling that we're going to run into Nox again in the future. We know that he's from Terrasen, so he'll probably go back to where he's from. And I just know we're going to end up in Terrasen at some point. And I still have this sense that maybe Celaena's going to be in trouble and she's going to need help, or I don't know. I just feel like we're going to come across Nox again and he's going to aid us in a time of need. At least I hope so. I don't think we've seen the last of him.
I think so too. He and Celaena have become allies and friends by this point. And so I would assume that Celaena's going to run into more trouble as the series continues. She's going to need allies. And so I think all of her friends and allies that she makes now, assuming that nothing bad happens to them, they will continue to be an ally and help her out in some form or fashion later in the series.
Yeah, agreed.
So in the next scene, we got back to Lady Kaltain, and it's a very short scene, but Lady Kaltain is on her way to the Great Hall for dinner with Perrington. He invited her to come eat with him, and surprise, surprise, she's high because of her headaches, but seems to be a common pattern with her, although she does have really terrible headache, so I guess I can understand why. But as she's
Really?
walking to maybe not.
I'm gonna
just
quote you on that, Lorraine.
No, I can't. I'm kidding. I can't relate. I don't have this experience. I'm trying to be empathetic, okay? But anyways, she's walking through the hallway and she starts to notice this weird black shadow aura surrounding a figure that walks towards her. And she doesn't recognize who it is. She just sees it as this amorphous black shadow thing. And Kaltain is in pain from her headache and too high to really understand what she is seeing. But as the figure passes her, it turns out that it is Cain. And again, this is just confirmation that Cain is evil. Something's going on with him.
I think it just further highlights Kaltain's sensitivity to magic or evil or both.
So later on in chapter 45, Celaena is back in her room and she's playing chess with Dorian. And she's thinking about a multitude of different things. She's still thinking about the word marks, the word gates, and how she can't reveal anything to Dorian because she's afraid that somehow, some way, it'll get back to the king. And she just ultimately doesn't know who she can trust about the situation. So she has a little bit of a debate about that internally. In addition, she is also still continuing to think about Cain and the Ridderak. The other thing in that thought is it's pretty noteworthy that she is actually very frightened by Cain and what he might do. She's genuinely afraid. Even in this chapter, she keeps Dorian with her to pass the time and keep her company because she doesn't want to be left alone because she's afraid that something could very happen to her. Yeah. Since they still have a day before the final duel. And then the second notable thought that she has in relation to Cain is Cain must have learned about word marks in the White Fang Mountains that cursed borderland between Otterland and the Western Wastes. They said that evil still crept out of the ruins of the Witch Kingdom, and that old women with iron teeth still wander the lonely roads in the mountain passes. There's been a couple mentions of both the White Fang Mountains, usually in reference to Cain, but also the Witch Kingdom. It was brought up earlier in the book, just as a passing geography conversation. I don't know, given the fact that this is the second mention of it, I do wonder if it will just become a setting at some point, or perhaps we'll have characters come up that are from the Witch Kingdom. I definitely feel like we're going to see more from the Witch Kingdom in future books.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, I think the universe is definitely going to expand, and I would not be surprised if we meet someone from the Witch Kingdom or we end up there ourselves. So at the end of the chapter, Celaena, after Dorian leaves, she's having trouble sleeping, but she does eventually succumb and doze off. And we get a brief glimpse into her mind as she's having a nightmare. And in a weird way, it's very detailed and also not detailed at all. There's nothing distinguishing about it. Something is chasing her. She's frantically trying to get away. And so my question for you, Lorraine, is I had to read this a couple times, and I have what I think, but I want to know what you think first. Do you think that this nightmare is a memory? It's an imagined nightmare, like something that just her imagination created, like the Ridderak chasing her, for example? Or do you think it's a premonition of the future?
Oh, that's interesting. I don't know. I think when I read it, I had taken it as an old memory.
Okay.
Because it says Celaena ran swifter than her young legs could manage. I do think that the part about running to the bridge is interesting. I don't know.
See, I took it very similarly to you in the idea that I thought it was a nightmare of a memory. And I also noted that faster than her young legs could carry her. We also know that she was found on the banks of a frozen river by Arab and Hamel, where she's heading towards a bridge. Presumably the bridge is over a body of water. And so then it made me wonder, the combination of those two phrases indicates that it potentially could be a memory of her the night that Terrasen was invaded and she lost everything and ended up on the banks of the frozen river. She was running from someone or something. So that is how I took it. So I was just curious what your thought was on it.
Yeah, I don't know. There's just so many routes that it could go, but it's just a very notable section.
Event.
I'm just gonna bookmark it, remember it for later. I don't know what
Yeah.
it means, but it's probably important.
It definitely piques your interest, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
In this next chapter, chapter 46, it's a very short chapter. Not a lot happens, so we do have just a few call outs for you. The first is that Dorian goes into the woods and he's going before the final test and duel to clear his mind. He's having all these feelings about Celaena and everything going on. And he says he'd gone too far. He should never have kissed her because now, no matter how he might have once envisioned his future or who he thought he'd spend it with, he couldn't imagine being with anyone else, wanting anyone else. This is pretty heavy language from Dorian. I feel this is definitely indicative that his feelings have really deepened into something more. I don't really want to say love because Dorian hasn't used that word, but Dorian feels very connected and invested in this relationship with Celaena. And so I just find that very interesting that he's so deeply involved in their relationship already. And so I'm definitely curious to see how their relationship develops. But I did think that was notable because that's pretty strong language.
It definitely is, which is also interesting just because his previous comment before that, which I had taken note of, was that he says, but Celaena, he didn't know how she felt. She'd kissed him greedily at that, but the women he'd loved in the past had always been eager. They'd gazed at him adoringly, while she just looked at him like a cat watching a mouse. So it's interesting to see that Dorian's feelings are definitely developing, but simultaneously he's on the fence about how Celaena feels.
Yeah, is she really in it? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So the next point in the chapter, Celaena is standing on her balcony and she's considering and thinking her path thus far and contemplates the truth of what it would really mean for her to become the king's assassin. She considers what she would be asked to do and how morally conflicting it might be for her to work for the king. She does have a thought where she thinks perhaps there were other reasons to fight tomorrow. Perhaps a few months in the castle hadn't been enough. Perhaps she wanted to stay here for reasons other than her eventual freedom. That was one thing that hopeless assassin from Endovir would never have believed, but it was true. She wanted to stay. And I think that this is really just a very perfect setup for what she will do. I do think she will become the champion of the people throughout all of Aurelia. Maybe not in the next book, but I do think eventually she will definitely be taking steps to undermine the king and this tyrannical conquest that he's been on. But I think it was just nice because she has found a greater purpose now than just her own desires to stay. And yeah, she really wants to do something greater for the whole realm.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that she's found a greater purpose too, because I feel like that's also indicated when she's having her thoughts about her friends that she's made while she's there. As she's thinking just about her journey thus far, she says, but try as she might, all she could think about was the half-starved, hopeless assassin who'd been dragged out of Endovir one autumn day by a snarling captain of the guard. What would she have said to the Princess Bargain had she known she would come to stand poised to lose so much? Would she have laughed if she had known that other things, other people, would come to mean as much as her freedom? And I feel like that's also very indicative that it speaks to Celaena's greater purpose, right? She can help Endovir, she can undermine the king, but also she's developed these really meaningful friendships with Chaol, Dorian, and Nehemia, and that they mean just as much to her, if not more, than her freedom. And so I thought that was heartbreaking in a way, right? That she has so much on the line, not just her freedom and her life, but her heart too. And so I was kind of like, oh, now I felt really invested in her being successful in the duels because I'm like, oh, honey, you know?
Yeah, she has to win.
Yeah, I agree. So this last chapter is pretty straightforward. There's not a ton to analyze. It's pretty plot driven, but I did have two things that I wanted to note and discuss. The first is Kaltain proceeds with the plan that she and Perrington had discussed in the castle greenhouse, that they're going to poison Celaena. Supposedly, it's supposed to be just enough poison to weaken her so that it will give Cain the edge he needs in the final duel to defeat her. But it did lead me to just some idle speculation. I really don't have any evidence to support this, but I did just think it would be interesting plot-wise if perhaps the wrong person drank the glass. It could be Nehemia, Kaltain, Dorian. All of those would make for a really interesting series of events. I mean, it is just a glass just sitting there, so that would seem obvious. However, I do feel that's unlikely. I feel like Celaena will ultimately be the one to drink it. So then it led me to the second sort of idle speculation is perhaps is it actually a lethal dose? It would not shock me if Duke Perrington told Kaltain it was just to weaken her, but in reality, it's actually just to, offer. I am definitely interested to see how it plays out. Lorraine, what did you think about that?
I'm pretty sure she's definitely going to get that spiked wine. It was meant for her. They're going to give it to her. So my main question was really just how is she going to get out of it? Because obviously if she's all muddled and not able to think, and react quickly in the way that she would be, then how is she going to overtake King?
Well, and it begs the question, I don't think the king would let Dorian or Kaltain or anyone interfere in the final duel, even if they suspect foul play. I don't know. So I do wonder, you're right, how is she going to get out of that?
Yeah. Oh, but I was thinking she still has that amulet, right? From Elena.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah, the necklace.
Yes.
And so maybe that's going to help her.
Yeah, because when the amulet first came up, we did talk about whether does it provide only physical protection, spiritual, magic against magic, or physical attacks. I don't know. So that's a really good question because I could definitely see that coming into play.
Maybe it'll expose. Because remember with Elena, she was talking about how it helped her see what Erewhon, who Erewhon really was and identify it. And so maybe that's going to come into play. Elena will be able to sense who or what Cain really is. And then, I don't know, somehow that'll lead to her being able to defeat it in some capacity. I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. I had not thought about that. The second notable thing they had in this chapter was as Celaena is preparing to duel Grave, both Kaltain and Nehemia offer their own personal weapons to Celaena to use in the duel. And I just thought that was a really nice symbolic gesture on both of their parts. Ultimately, Celaena ends up taking Nehemia's weapon, and it did make me tear up, but it did pull in my heartstrings a little bit because it's such an emotional connection that they have, and Celaena taking the weapon really represents more than just their friendship. And Nehemia says to Celaena, "Let it be within the Eelway weapon that you take them down. Let wood from the forest of Eelway defeat steel from Otterland. Let the king's champion be someone who understands how the innocents suffer." And this is especially important and personal to Nehemia because we know that many, many of the people in Indovir are rebels from Eelway, and that Nehemia is rumored to be a supporter of them. But it's also just her people that are being forced into these death camps. And then Celaena thinks she knew what the princess was asking of her. As the king's champion, she might find ways to save countless lives, ways to undermine the king's authority. And that Celaena realized was what Elena, the king's own ancestor, might want too. So further evidence, it's a very symbolic exchange. The weight of the staff is more than physical. It's like the mantle that she'll carry if/when she wins and becomes the king's champion. So I did think it was important to know and just kind of made me a little emotional.
Yeah, I thought that was really nice. Nehemia and Kaltain are both just firmly showing support for her and being like, we stand with you on this. We want you to win. And then before Celaena steps into the ring, she says to Kaltain, "I want to thank you for making my freedom mean something." And he responds with, "Give him hell."
Yeah.
And that was the end of the chapter. But
yeah,
everyone's come full circle. She's restored her relationship with Nehemia and their friendship, and Kaltain and Dorian. Obviously, we've seen their development as far as their conflicting opinions and feelings about what's really going on in Otterland, and the role that they've played being part of Otterland's army or Dorian being the prince of Otterland. It was just a nice way for them to all come together as a team.
Yeah. And now it's time for Celaena to kick some ass.
Oh, gosh. Before we get into the final set of chapters and we end the book, do you have any outstanding questions or thoughts of any sort?
I mean, I do, but I'm going to wait and see how the book ends. A lot of my questions are more like background story information, things about Celaena and word marks and stuff that I really don't think we're going to get a resolution to at this point. I think we're pretty much going to see how the final duel plays out. Celaena's probably going to be named the assassin, and we're just going to end on a like, all is well. We killed the Ridderak. I'm the assassin again, and I'm free, sort of. And, you know, we'll see.
Do you think it's really going to just be as easy as her catching Cain in a vulnerable position, though?
No.
Okay.
Do you
think she's just going to kill him?
I don't know. My thought is that she's going to take the poison. Something's going to happen, and there's going to be some intervention, right? Because Dorian and Kayla are not going to let Cain kill her, especially if it's obvious that she's been poisoned. So then it begs the question, is the duel rescheduled? If it is, then they kill Cain in between. I don't know. Maybe Nehemia kills Cain? Somebody else kills Cain in defense of Celaena? I could definitely see, because Nehemia definitely is not going to stand there and watch Cain slaughter Celaena. I feel like it ain't going to happen.
I feel like there's going to be some massive reveal of who Cain is. Maybe not of what Cain is revealed to, but like maybe in this process of Celaena being poisoned and then people realizing that something is off with her as she's dueling Cain, it's going to come out somehow because they're going to be like, who poisoned her? Yeah. Like, because they're going to see that. They're going to wonder who it is.
That's true.
If she overcomes it and then kills Cain, then is something dramatic going to happen? Is he simply just going to fall over and die? I can't imagine that he's just going to do that.
Yeah.
I feel like if he goes out, it's probably going to go out with a show, right?
Yeah.
So
I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know either. I guess
I'm definitely going to stay up and read and find out.
We're going to see again. It's 11:30 p.m. But
holy shit.
Okay. We are done with our analysis, and now it is time for our Champions Bracket update. By the end of Chapter 47, we are left with 3 champions, Cain, Celaena, and Grave. Nox left after Celaena's warning at the end of Chapter 45, and then Renault, the mercenary, was defeated dueling Cain in Chapter 46. So we're going to see. That's really all the update that we have at this point.
No
Very
more
straightforward.
Murders, no more tests. Yeah, just Nox leaves, Renault's defeated. It's down to the final 3, baby.
Yes. Obviously, we know it's going to be Celaena and Cain at the very end of this.
Of course.
But yeah, we got to see what happens. I'm really disappointed that these champions tests didn't turn out to be a bigger part of the plot.
I agree. The few, like the poison test and then when they're scaling the wall and she saves Nox, I really like those scenes. Those are some of my favorite scenes in the book. I could have done with a little less love triangle and a little more tests, honestly.
Yeah, especially because the love triangle didn't amount to anything. I'm like, what is this all
Well, not
for?
yet.
Like,
we don't know.
Okay, I know, but I was like, if you're not going to give it to us in this book, if the triangle's not going to come to a resolution in this book, then we could see a little bit less of it. You could just spread it out more, I guess.
True.
But yeah, I would have liked to see a little more action.
Yeah, same.
All right, we are finally almost done with our episode, and as promised, to wrap it up, we will be sharing our favorite moments. So, Addison, what were your favorite moments or quotes?
So, I only had a few. The first is I really liked when Celaena was finally able to tell Nehemia everything, and then when Nehemia gives her that special name, really just that whole scene between the two of them was really nice. I'm just happy that their relationship is in repair, and it's nice to see a relationship that's meaningful to Celaena outside of Dorian and Kale. So I really like that. I also just enjoyed, similarly in that regard, another relationship outside of Dorian and Kale. I also enjoyed Nox and Celaena's scene. I know we didn't get a ton of their interactions and friendship in the book, but it's pretty clear to say that Celaena obviously cared enough about him to warn him, to want him to be safe. And so I really hope we get to see him in future books, but I really enjoyed just that interaction and Nox coming to the realization of who she really was. And then but you're a girl. I really enjoyed that. And then last but not least, when Nehemia offers Celaena her staff and she accepts it. And with that, the implication and the duty that befalls on her, not just to take the weapon and win the duel, but what it will mean for her to work for the King of Adarlan in ways that she can help sabotage or undermine the king's agenda and represent the innocents that have been and will be affected by the king's choices. So those are my favorite parts. What were your favorite parts?
My favorite moments, I actually really liked the Ridderak scene because it was just so exciting and thrilling.
Yeah.
I feel like it was the first point in the book where I was really like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And of course, we also get more information about the fact that we finally know what the creature is, and then also the word marks and see them working in real time. That was one thing that I liked. My next part that I liked was still, obviously, we know at this point that I'm team Dorian. So when he says, because now, no matter how he might have once envisioned his future or who he thought he'd spend it with, he couldn't imagine being with anyone else, wanting anyone else. And I just like it because I'm a romantic and Dorian's a romantic. So it's
get
cute.
a review too.
And then my last favorite thing was everything that she says to Nehemia, but also her final words with Chaol before she leaves. And she says, I want to thank you for making my freedom mean something. And he responds with, give him hell. And I was like,
yeah, that is sweet. You're right.
Yes.
Every time I think I have my favorite moments, then you say yours, and I'm like, oh yeah, those are my favorite too.
There's just so many good moments in the book. So you can never just pick a few. And with that, we have reached the end of our episode. So thank you all so much for joining us for another episode of the Booked on Fantasy podcast. As always, we would love to hear your thoughts. So if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast, leave us a review, or share it with all your friends who love fantasy fiction as well. You can also keep up with us on a daily basis by following us on social media, which all of the links to those will be linked in the episode description below. That is all that we have for you today. Stay nerdy, everyone, and we'll catch you next week for the final Throne of Glass episode where we cover chapters 48 through 55. Bye!
Bye! And eventually they do kiss. And wait, no, I didn't make that wrong. Nope, I went ahead. Whoops. I'm like thinking I'm wrong kissing chapter. There's a lot of kissing and not kissing in this chapter, okay? This next okay.
Maybe in another life I'll be an FBI agent. Just kidding. Yeah. I'm too unserious to be.
Oh my god, Lauren, you'd be a terrible FBI agent. Oh my god, it'd be so bad. No.
I'd be putting the wrong people in jail.
You would like turn it into like there's a mole in the FBI. It's the director, like you would you would take it way too far.
Oh, 100%.